Ulysses is a complicated character, and this is evidenced by the kinds of comments I've been getting in my Lonesome Road videos. There are two responses to Ulysses. Half of my viewers think Ulysses is interesting, brooding, mysterious, intriguing. And the other half of my viewers think he's annoying, long-winded, full of himself, unnecessarily poetic, unable to give us a straight answer. Which of these is true? Well, to better understand his philosophy and his unique mind, we have to understand his personal history. This is laid out for us, piece by piece, throughout the story of Lonesome Road. We learned that Ulysses was a member of the Twisted Hares tribe. The Twisted Hares were one of the 86 tribes that Caesar conquered. They did so by feigning an alliance with them. Vulpes and Culta came to the Twisted Hares and offered an allegiance, asking the Twisted Hares to scout for the Legion, and in exchange the Legion would attack the Twisted Hares' enemies and leave the Twisted Hares alone. After defeating all other tribes in Arizona, the Legion broke their alliance and betrayed the Twisted Hares. After conquering the Twisted Hares, the Legion brought them to dry wells, where they were either conscripted and absorbed by the Legion or executed.
It's where my tribe was taken, where another history was put to the blade, lesson taught. It is where we realize Vulpes did not approach us as equals, where we realized the wolf had come, and we watched our history die.
Ulysses was absorbed by the Legion. We don't know what his thoughts were at this time. Did he do so out of practical necessity because the only other option was death? Or did he do so because he really believed in the Legion? We don't really know. But we do know that later in his career, as a member of Caesar's Legion, he did begin to truly believe what the Legion stood for. He had a great deal of respect for Caesar himself and obeyed Caesar's commands. His respect for Caesar was so strong that even after leaving Caesar's Legion, he still obeyed Caesar's commands, one of which was to kill no other courier because any courier could secretly be a Legion Frumentari, a spy.
Kill no courier. Caesar's words. I honored them. Other couriers could have been Legion, like me.
Even after having left the Legion, he still sees many legionnaires as brothers. If while representing Caesar's Legion you threaten to execute him, he says,
Then Legion kills a Legion.
Ulysses was one of these Frumentari. He worked as a courier in order to spy for the Legion. This job as a courier required that he travel all over, and the further he got away from the Legion, the more he was able to observe life and to consider them on his own. It was during these travels that Ulysses discovered Hoover Dam and the NCR, both of which had previously been unknown to the Legion. When he reported back to the Legion, this news captured Caesar's imagination. If it had not been for Ulysses, the Legion might have never invaded Nevada. All this time, Ulysses was watching, learning, and absorbing. The Legion's betrayal of his own tribe, the Twisted Hares, still weighed upon him, and the knowledge that he was responsible for sending the Legion to Nevada gnawed at him. He, like many tribals, hated the NCR. That was one thing he agreed with the Legion upon, but he was starting to become disillusioned with the Legion.
There's no future in the bear or bull. The bear is diseased, barely clings to life. And the bull, when the Legion reaches the sea, it will turn on itself and die.
He ultimately concluded that the Legion had no future, that even if they were ultimately successful, took the dam and wiped out NCR, that once they reached the coast, they would have no one left to conquer but themselves. The Legion, therefore, could never rebuild civilization. It was not the answer he was looking for. While as a Frumentari undercover as a courier, he heard tale of another courier, walking roads different from the ones he walked. And he heard tale of the Divide, a prosperous new nation, affiliated with neither the NCR nor the Legion, an independent nation, made wealthy from its own trade. And so Ulysses sought out the Divide to see if maybe it could inspire him, to see if, now that the Twisted Hares were gone, it might become a new home for Ulysses.
There was hope here. Another chance. A new nation stirring to life. A place I could have set my flag. Not the America of old, but something larger than the tribes of the East, something larger than the houses of the West, something better.
On his way, he discovered the Courier he had heard rumor about, the Courier whose work had allowed the divide to grow. But while tracking this other Courier, he watched the Courier deliver a package that ended up waking up the nuclear missiles buried beneath the divide and causing them to detonate. This explosion nearly killed Ulysses. He was only saved by the medical robots of the divide. By this time, he was wearing his old world flag symbol. The medical iBots saw this old world symbol on his back, mistook him for U.S. military personnel, and began to tend to his wounds. The destruction of the divide broke his heart.
The only other home, the chance of a home, was what you built at the divide. Then you destroyed it.
It had been proof that men did not need the tactics of either the Legion or the NCR to thrive, but its destruction threw that all out the window. Instead, the message Ulysses took away from this was that anything, even something as important as the divide, could be destroyed or changed forever by one person. In this case, the Courier.
The message that one can kill a nation, can kill a symbol, and all that gather beneath its flag. I don't blame you for the divide. I blame you for what you made me see.
This sparked an idea in Ulysses. What the Courier had done was an accident. He accidentally destroyed the divide. But what if someone tried to change the world with purpose? How far could one person go? He continued to chew on these thoughts as he worked with the Legion. The Legion, after all, was the only one standing against the NCR. They were having the most success, and with the divide gone, the Legion was the only home Ulysses had. So he went back to the Legion. And it was then that Caesar sent him to the Great Salt Lake as an ambassador to the Whitelegs tribe. He was told to promise the Whitelegs induction into the Legion if they first proved themselves by wiping out the New Canaanites. Caesar's desire to destroy New Canaan was a personal one. New Canaan was where he came from. It was the New Canaanites who knew the man he used to be, and it was also to New Canaan where Joshua Graham, the former legate, fled after Caesar failed to kill him by throwing him into the Grand Canyon. And so, Ulysses dutifully went to the Great Salt Lake. He told the Whitelegs all of these things and helped them rearm. He discovered supply caches and bunkers in Utah, including one called Spanish Fork, and he armed the tribe with powerful automatic weapons. The Whitelegs then sacked New Canaan, burning it to the ground and killing many people. But all this time, Ulysses knew that the Legion was lying.
If New Canaan burns, Kaiser might see them. Might. Even the chance was a lie.
The Legion had no intention to induct the Whitelegs. It was a simple lie to get the Whitelegs to do what the Legion wanted. And Ulysses was fine with this until the Whitelegs began to revere Ulysses. They did so by adopting his signature hairstyle. Ulysses had braided hair, and this was part of his tribal culture. These braids told a story. This was how their tribe communicated with each other. He was the last of the twisted hairs. There was no one left on Earth who could understand his braids, and yet he wore them, clinging to those memories, clinging to that history. When the Whitelegs started to braid their own hair in an effort to respect Ulysses, Ulysses was instead horrified, because at this moment it all came rushing back. The wolf-like smile of Vulpes Inculta lied to his own tribe, the Twisted Hairs, which led to their tribe's destruction, and Ulysses saw this exact thing happening again to the Whitelegs, only he was now in the role of Vulpes Inculta.
It was like Vulpes was speaking through me. Use the night, silence, and fire to change their words to please, to screams. No need for bombs when hate will do.
In the face of every white-legged tribal who had braided his hair to match Ulysses, he saw a glimpse of one of his own tribesmen. It disgusted him because the whitelegs were using these braids to manipulate Ulysses to try and win Caesar's favor. These braids had actually meant something to Ulysses and his tribe, but the whitelegs were doing it thoughtlessly, thinking that if they flatter Ulysses by adopting his braids, maybe they'll have a better chance of joining the legion. So it is understandable why he was insulted, but I also think this moment really hit home to him that his tribe was dead, their history wiped out. Ulysses, the only one left who carried that history, who remembered those names, those faces, what these braids meant. And seeing the whitelegs braiding their own hair showed him how meaningless it really all was. These whitelegs would go on and live the remainder of their lives passing down these braids to their children without even understanding what they meant. All of the time and effort that went into developing and maintaining the twisted hair culture was ultimately wasted. In Ulysses' eyes, the whitelegs were a shadow of what the twisted hairs had been, and to see his tribe's legacy being adopted by them disgusted him. It was here that he finally abandoned the Legion for good. He needed a place to go to gather his thoughts. And so he moved to the Mojave to live as a hermit for some time. We actually find Ulysses' old home in Fallout New Vegas. If we head east from Prim, we find a road that winds around a hillside off towards Camp Searchlight. If instead of taking the road, we turn right, we eventually find an abandoned farm. There are crops growing outside, we find a well and a pump, and whoever had lived here had even been potting other edible plants for consumption. The hallmark perhaps of a tribal who is used to mixing these reagents for medicinal concoctions. We see a little path that goes up to a shack, and we learn that this is called Wolfhorn Ranch. However, the Fallout New Vegas strategy guide calls it Ulysses Camp. And in fact, the Italian, Spanish, and French versions of Fallout New Vegas call it Ulysses Camp even in the published game. This is one of the many places that Legion assassins can accost the Courier. Inside the shack, we don't find much. There are lockers to the left. We see a straight razor in here, so a man did at one time live here. We see a number of minor containers, but on the stove, we find a unique weapon, the chopper. The chopper does twice the damage of a typical cleaver, 14 compared to 7. It does way more attacks per second, 3.92 compared to 2.51, bringing its DPS up to 54.9 compared to 17.8. It has a special attack called Backslash, which does 70% of its damage in VATS, but at the cost of 5 fewer action points, which greatly increases damage per action point. It looks like other cleavers except that the blade is rusted, and there's white tape wrapped around the handle. Heading outside his shack, we can walk up a trail to the top of some hills overlooking the road. If we turn right, we pass by a flagpole, and at the base of the flagpole is a grave. Inside the grave, we find a small assortment of goods, but of note, we find a bladed gauntlet. The bladed gauntlet is not unique, but it's not often found in the Mojave. Sometimes it appears on the inventories of traveling merchants, but there are not a lot of enemies in the Mojave that use it. However, the Whiteleg tribe, when we meet them in Zion Canyon, regularly uses the bladed gauntlet. This tells me then that Ulysses came here after meeting the Whitelegs. But who is buried here? We don't know, but perhaps Ulysses took a mate for himself from the Whiteleg tribe. Or maybe we needn't go that far. Perhaps it was a traveling companion. Ulysses brought this person with him to the Mojave, thinking maybe he could settle down, start a family. But she ultimately died either to disease or raids from the nearby raiders, and so he buried her here. That is complete speculation. We really don't know whose grave this is. Another indication that this is Ulysses' camp is if we go across the catwalk the other direction, we find a small lookout tower. There's an ammo box on the ground behind some sandbags, and it overlooks the road. This, in addition to the fact that legionary assassins come this way, tells me that perhaps Ulysses was expecting retaliation from the Legion for desertion. And so he used this to keep an eye out. We also learn why this is called a ranch. We find bighorners walking around nearby, and we learned from Honest Hearts that tribals, including the dead horses, tended to work with herds of bighorners. Perhaps Ulysses was herding the bighorners here before he left. But ultimately, he did leave, perhaps inspired to after the death of whomever he buried in this grave, or because he still needed to find purpose in all of this. The NCR is corrupt and cowardly, using munitions to win their battles.
But you killed like NCR, like Hanlon, with mines, bombs, missiles, killed Legion along with the bear, like a coward, kills from a distance.
The Legion had no future and could never reform civilization, and the Divide was destroyed. But what destroyed the Divide was Old World technology. He had admired the Old World for some time, wearing America's symbol on his back. He had even been accustomed to using an American flagpole as a weapon while working with the Whitelegs. They called him the flag bearer because of this. And so he left his ranch in search of any remnants of the Old World to see if there was something he could resurrect from pre-war America. This search brought him to the Big Empty. It was there he found Father Elijah, and it was there where he met Christine. He talked with Christine at length, a member of the Brotherhood of Steel, to see if maybe the Brotherhood could be a place where he could plant his flag, a place where he could make a new home, but he was ultimately disillusioned by them. All they were interested in was hoarding technology, not rebuilding civilization. He then met with the think tank scientists, but discovered that they had lost their minds. Literally, their brains were in jars, and they had been degrading over the past 200 years, sitting in the preservation fluid.
It was madness. Asked them a question in anger. Got an answer. More than I expected.
He had hoped to talk with someone from the Old World to try and figure out what inspired these scientists to stand with America. But not getting anywhere with these scientists, out of frustration, he asked them, "Who are you that do not know your history?" But that question reminded them of America. In particular, it awoke Dr. Klein. And Dr. Klein told him that nuclear missiles still existed, buried in the ruin of the Divide.
Answer told me what happened here at the Divide, the how of it, and that was enough.
Ulysses wasn't expecting to hear this, and to confirm it, he traveled to the X-17 meteorological station. There he found a map of the Divide and the still live nuclear warheads marked by a magnifying glass. With this knowledge, he fully formed the idea he had begun to ponder while the medical robots were healing him in the ruins of the Divide. One person, by accident, was able to destroy a nation. What could one person do on purpose? Possibly destroy two. Ulysses now had the knowledge of the nuclear warheads buried in the Divide, and so he traveled back to the Divide to use these missiles to wipe out the NCR and Caesar's Legion. All of this is communicated to the Courier over the course of numerous holotapes and long-winded conversations. I'm a bit forgiving of Ulysses for his unique personality quirks and the way that he talks, because we have to remember that Ulysses is a tribal. English was likely not his native language. We learned from Honest Hearts that tribals don't speak English. It was the New Canaanites who taught the Dead Horses and the Sorrows English, and it was likely the Legion that forced their conquered tribes to learn English. But as not a native English speaker, Ulysses grew up communicating a very different way. We are accustomed to expecting straight answers to straight questions. We find it really annoying when people respond cryptically or poetically or using riddles. We feel like they're beating about the bush, that they're not being honest with us. But that's part of our own culture, and it's likely part of the culture of the people who grew up in the Mojave. For tribals, it may not be an intended insult. It may simply be part of the way that they're used to communicating. It may also be that Ulysses is struggling to find the English words. He and his tribe had used many other ways to describe the things around them. For example, when we talk with Ulysses about nuclear radiation, he has to pause and correct you and say, "Oh, you mean the invisible fire."
The invisible fires burn here. True enough.
I think this can explain why he talks the way he does, but let's now focus less on the way he chooses to communicate and focus more upon his philosophy and upon the logic he used to come to the conclusions that he did. That neither the NCR nor the Legion are worth saving. That both deserved to be destroyed or to be hamstrung so that other nations might rise up in their place.
But it is their philosophy that was flawed, their weapons used with new perspective. Those weapons can be used to kill a symbol that has already proven itself wrong. These governments of the two-headed bear, the Legion, they carry old world ideas into an age that no longer needs them, where they cannot live.
Well, the Courier makes a very good point when trying to talk Ulysses down, because Ulysses has already decided, in his mind, that neither the NCR nor the Legion is fit to rebuild civilization. But history has not proved this yet. The Courier can argue against destroying them with nukes by saying, let history play out. Let history decide who is the strongest and who is correct. Ulysses at first doesn't want to give history a chance because he knows best. In essence, he's claiming to be able to predict the future here. He's making a decision about the future of two nations based upon what he thinks will happen if either are allowed to exist. But he's no magician, he's no soothsayer. How can he know what will happen? He can't. And this is the essence of the Courier's argument. Ulysses thinks a lot about himself, and this is a character flaw of his. For example, he is really quick to judge the Courier, even when we tell him that it's ridiculous to blame the Courier for blowing up the divide because the Courier's not responsible for the package the NCR decided to deliver, and the Courier had no way to know what was inside the package. He dismisses that appeal by saying that it was carelessness on the part of the Courier, and that carelessness is inexcusable.
There was no justice in it. It was an act of carelessness, a coward killing an idea before it had a chance. I see your meaning. You're tying this to our history. But it is different. The symbol I destroy, it has already proven itself wrong.
But when we look at Ulysses' own history, it's riddled with the same mistakes. It was Ulysses who discovered Hoover Dam in the NCR. One could say that it was the knowledge of those two things that was Ulysses' package, a package he hand-delivered to Caesar. And once Caesar got that package, he waged a war against the NCR and the West in an attempt to conquer Hoover Dam. How many lives has this knowledge destroyed? How many families has this knowledge shattered? How many women has this knowledge enslaved? I would wager that it ranks right up there with the population of the divide before the detonation. And then he does it a second time. When he visits the Whitelegs, he arms them with automatic weapons and pits them against New Canaan. Yes, he was ordered to do this by his superior. This was a directive from Caesar. One could say that this wasn't his fault, he was just following orders. But the end result was the end of a nation. The Whitelegs destroyed New Canaan, killing many of the people who lived there. The New Canaanites now survive as a dispersed people.
I asked the Whitelegs to destroy a people with ancestry going back thousands of years. Another death of history, lost to time.
How was that any better than what the Courier did at the Divide? If anything, it's worse because Ulysses knew exactly what he was doing while he was doing it. And I think a lot of this plays into his own personal regret. We heard it in his voice when he talked about discovering Hoover Dam. It sounds like he regretted revealing that information to Caesar.
Kimball, Kaiser, House. You'd think that our world was that wall, cutting the Colorado. If I'd never laid eyes on it, never spoke of it.
His memory and reasoning here is pretty convenient. It allows him to blame the Courier for something the Courier had no knowledge of and no way to prevent, while ignoring the very things he did to destroy nations. Ultimately, Ulysses is vindicated because he proves that yes, one man with purpose can do even more catastrophic things than one man by accident. Ulysses is capable of nuking both nations, but he doesn't seem to spend too long thinking about whether or not he should. He's very quick to judge both the NCR and the Legion. He makes himself both their judge and executioner, giving himself more power and his opinion more authority than he or it have any moral right to have.
If you speak for the two-headed bear, I'll hear your words, even if I will be the only one to hear them. If you believe it should not die this day, then answer me why.
And that's where the Courier comes in. I've made a lot of videos about Fallout, and we've recounted many of the horrible stories of pre-war America. Sometimes when I tell one of those horrible stories, someone will leave a comment saying, you know, the apocalypse was a good thing. This place did not deserve to exist. It's good that pre-war America and pre-war China have been wiped out. But what those viewers forget are the millions upon millions of people who had nothing to do with the horrible decisions made by the American government or the evil things done by pre-war corporations. It's easy to want to push the reset button, to see a flaw in the machine, and to conclude that the machine needs to be scrapped. But to do so is to ignore the mundane but important lives of everyday people. And that is exactly what Ulysses has done. Ulysses has seen the flaws in the NCR which are real and do exist, and the flaws of the Legion which are real and they do exist. And his answer is to scrap the machines, to start all over, under the false assumption that whatever emerges in their place will, for some reason, be perfect, or at least better than what exists. That's a huge assumption to make. It's also a huge assumption for Ulysses to decide that the Divide was perfect. He had not spent much time there. He had only heard of it by rumor. He arrived at the Divide just in time to see it end. The NCR had seen the wealth of the Divide, and they were there to annex it. The Legion had seen the challenge the NCR presented, and they were there to conquer it. But no one knows the politics of the Divide. How did they govern themselves? How did they deal with social issues? How did they tax their citizens? Did they have ambitions for expanding? How did they protect themselves? None of us have the answer to those questions, and they're very important questions, because those are all of the things that Ulysses criticizes about the NCR and the Legion. By sentencing both nations to death, he's ignoring the mundane lives of everyday people, the caravanners of the NCR, who just want to do business between California and Nevada, the soldiers of the NCR, who needed something to do with their youth, who needed a way to earn money to feed their families, the tribals of the Legion, who were forced into the Legion ranks against their will. It's not really much of a choice when Caesar comes up and says, all right, your tribe is conquered now, you have a choice, you can join us or not. Oh, and by the way, if you choose not to, yeah, we're going to crucify you. That's not much of a choice. And it makes me think that there are many members of Caesar's Legion whose heart are not really behind the Republic. And let's not forget about the innocent slaves found in Legion pens or for sale at Legion auctions. Ulysses doesn't think about these people. He just wants to press the reset button. This is why the Courier has to remind Ulysses that just because you destroy something bad doesn't mean that something worse won't replace it.
You're saying when the meaning gets lost, that what happens here can make things worse. Happened in the Mojave. Flags of the bear and the bull. It may be that as much destruction has been written in the earth here, you may build something else, as you built the Divide. You have spoken truly. There is a shadow of a nation behind you, the hope of a people.
Ulysses is not a stupid man. He's a thoughtful, introspective man. He's not an educated man simply because education that we're used to doesn't exist in these post-apocalyptic tribes. But as a thoughtful man, we can reason with him. He doesn't want to do the wrong thing. He genuinely thinks that by nuking the NCR and the Legion, that he's making humanity better.
I do this because I care, because I believe it must be done.
That is an erroneous thought. He's making a big mistake, but at least he's genuine in his belief. This is why we can successfully talk him down. As a thoughtful man and an honest man, he welcomes conversation. He can be reasoned with. Ultimately, Ulysses' story is a story of tragedy. He came to this horrific conclusion that the only answer is to destroy two nations after suffering through personal tragedy after personal tragedy. The destruction of his own tribe by the lies of the Legion, watching himself become the very same kind of liar. Seeing every home he ever cared about destroyed. Ulysses brings a lot of trauma with him, and this, I think, impairs his decision-making. People say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but I don't believe that's true. I think that what doesn't kill you leaves a scar. Ulysses has been scarred. Knowing this, we can pity Ulysses, but I don't think that we can agree with him. In my game, as hard as it was, I chose to sacrifice Eddie and to defuse the bomb, rather than to nuke either the NCR or the Legion. I don't do this because I think both factions are perfect. Far from it. They are both incredibly flawed. And I certainly don't believe that one of them shouldn't lose. I'm happy to pick sides in this fight. I do prefer one over the other. My issue is on the method by which we choose to defeat our enemy. If there's one thing we should have learned while playing the Fallout series, is that using nukes to destroy our enemies is not a good idea. Within the context of this game, the nukes that were used to devastate America have had lasting, long-term negative effects, leading to wastelands that even after 200 years have not fully recovered, leading to new creatures and monsters, horrible mutations that humanity has to suffer with. Who's to say what would happen if we launch more of these old-world nukes aimed at American soil? Even if I were to say that the Legion deserves to be completely wiped out, or the NCR, they're just so corrupt, they deserve to be completely wiped out. Even if I believed that, I would never choose to do so using nukes, because these nukes do much more than just cut off the lifeline to the NCR, or wipe out the Legion's camps in the east. They cause innocent people to suffer. And we are in effect using a scorched earth type of warfare, where even after the enemy is long gone, future generations of humanity are gonna suffer for what we chose to do at either the Long 15 or the Dry Wells, making those places inhospitable for hundreds and hundreds of more years. Again, I don't think either the NCR or the Legion are perfect, or that they don't deserve to be punished. I just think that using nukes to do so is short-sighted, lacks humanity, and ignores the horrible evidence we've been combing through all around us in every Fallout game we play. Ulysses needed to be reminded of this. Thankfully, he's a reasonable man, and the Courier is there to reason with him. But those are just my thoughts. What are your thoughts on Ulysses and the final choices you can make in Lonesome Road? Do you think that he's just insufferably pompous? Or do you think that his idea to nuke two nations was respectable? That he's got a good argument? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I publish a new Fallout video 6 days a week on a wide range of topics spanning all of the games. For the past week and a half, I've been focusing on the Lonesome Road DLC for Fallout New Vegas. We are almost done. We've got one video left in this series, and that's our big loot video, where we go over every piece of loot we can find in Lonesome Road. I'll be publishing that tomorrow, and if you want to make sure that you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. I sang a song. I played it off in episode 7 of this series. People have been asking for a copy, and I'm happy to say that it's live. You can find a link to the song in the description below or in the comments below. It's available on iTunes and Apple Music, and it will eventually be available on other stores, including Spotify. I've got a new shirt in the shop, folks. Who are you that do not know your history? On the front, we have the famous quote, and on the back, we've got the old world stars and stripes. I've got a version of this shirt with just the quote, and another version with just the stars and stripes on either the front or the back. These shirts come in a wide array of colors and in a variety of sizes. I have a bunch of other designs. I've been adding new designs to the shop every day this week, so if you want to check it out, you can find a link to my shop in the description below, or you can click here. If you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, with a brand new video.